The British Empire in the aftermath of World War I was a behemoth, a vast tapestry of territories spanning every corner of the globe. It was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, a testament to its sheer scale and reach. From the bustling cities of India to the savannas of Africa, the British flag flew high, a symbol of imperial power and prestige. The victory in the Great War, despite its immense costs, served to further bolster the empire's standing on the world stage. Britain's economic and military might seemed unparalleled. Its navy ruled the waves, safeguarding its extensive trade routes and projecting its power across the oceans. London, the heart of the empire, pulsed with the energy of a global financial centre. The riches of the colonies flowed into its coffers, fueling its industries and sustaining its prosperity. However, beneath the veneer of imperial grandeur, cracks were beginning to appear. The rumblings of discontent were growing louder in the colonies, where the demand for self-determination was gaining momentum. World War I, a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, left an indelible mark on the British Empire. While Britain emerged victorious, the cost of victory was staggering. The war had drained its coffers, decimated its young men, and exhausted its industrial capacity. The economic burden of the war was immense, leaving Britain heavily indebted, primarily to the United States. This financial strain undermined Britain's global standing and weakened its ability to maintain its vast empire. The unprecedented casualties and horrors of trench warfare shattered the sense of invincibility that had once characterized the British Empire. The war had exposed the limitations of British power and sowed the seeds of doubt about the empire's long-term viability. While the British Navy remained formidable, the army had suffered heavy losses and was no longer the invincible force it once was. The war had highlighted the need for modernization and reform, but the economic constraints of the post-war period made it difficult to implement these changes effectively. Other nations, particularly the United States, were rapidly catching up, challenging Britain's traditional dominance in these fields. The period between the two world wars was a time of profound change and uncertainty for the British Empire. The euphoria of victory in 1918 quickly gave way to a sobering reality. The empire was deeply in debt, its economy was struggling, and its people were weary of war. The cracks in the facade of imperial grandeur, barely visible before, were now impossible to ignore. One of the most significant developments of this period was the rise of nationalist movements within the colonies. The war had fostered a sense of national identity and self-awareness among colonized peoples. They had fought and died for the empire, often in far-off lands, and they returned home with a new sense of entitlement and a growing desire for self-determination. In India, Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a powerful voice for independence. His philosophy of non-violent resistance captured the imagination of millions and posed a significant challenge to British rule. The British government, grappling with economic woes and the rising tide of nationalism, found itself increasingly unable to maintain its grip on its vast empire. World War II dealt a decisive blow to the already weakened British Empire. Although Britain, alongside its allies, emerged victorious from the conflict, the victory came at a tremendous cost. The war had utterly exhausted Britain's resources, both human and financial. The country was heavily in debt, its infrastructure was devastated, and its global standing was significantly diminished. The war effort had required a monumental mobilization of resources, forcing Britain to liquidate its overseas assets and rely heavily on loans, primarily from the United States. This further eroded Britain's economic independence and left it in a precarious financial position at the war's end. The once mighty British Empire was now heavily reliant on its allies for economic support. Furthermore, the war had irrevocably shifted the global balance of power. The United States, emerging from the conflict as a superpower, became the dominant force in the post-war world. The war had irrevocably altered the dynamics of the relationship between Britain and its colonies, paving the way for the wave of decolonization that would sweep the globe in the post-war era. The year 1947 marked a pivotal moment in the decline of the British Empire with India's independence. This momentous event, a culmination of decades of struggle and sacrifice by the Indian people, signaled the beginning of the end for Britain's colonial dominance. India, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, was no longer content to be ruled from afar. The road to Indian independence was fraught with challenges. The British government, reluctant to relinquish its most prized possession, initially resisted calls for self-rule. The Indian independence movement, led by figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, gained momentum in the years following World War II. The partition of India into two independent states, India and Pakistan, was a deeply traumatic event, marked by widespread violence and displacement. Despite the challenges and controversies surrounding partition, India's independence was a watershed moment in world history. India's independence had a domino effect, inspiring other colonies to demand their freedom. The sun was setting on the British Empire, ushering in a new era of global politics. The 1950s and 1960s witnessed an unprecedented wave of decolonization across the African continent, further accelerating the decline of the British Empire. The wind of change that British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan famously spoke of in 1960 was a powerful force, sweeping away the old colonial order and ushering in a new era of independence and self-determination for African nations. Inspired by India's independence and fueled by a growing sense of national consciousness, African nations, one after another, broke free from the shackles of colonial rule. Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, became the first sub-Saharan African nation to achieve independence in 1957, setting off a chain reaction across the continent. The process of decolonization was not without its challenges. Some transitions were peaceful, while others were marred by violence and instability. Despite these challenges, the decolonization of Africa was a momentous historical event. The British Empire, once a dominant force on the continent, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The Suez Crisis of 1956 marked the decline of the British Empire. Egypt's nationalization of the Suez Canal exposed British limitations post-World War II. The canal was vital to Britain, and its nationalization by Nasser was a direct challenge. Britain, France, and Israel launched a military intervention but faced international condemnation. The crisis marked the end of Britain's global dominance, shifting power to the US and USSR. Harold Macmillan's Wind of Change speech, delivered to the Parliament of South Africa in February 1960, stands as a pivotal moment in British history. Macmillan acknowledged the inevitable tide of decolonization sweeping across Africa and urged his audience to embrace the changing realities. His speech marked a significant shift in British foreign policy. It signaled the end of the Empire era and the need for Britain to adapt. Macmillan's words, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent," reflected a growing awareness that the old ways of empire were no longer tenable. The speech was met with mixed reactions. Many in Britain viewed it as a betrayal of British interests. However, others saw it as a necessary acknowledgement of the changing times. By the 1970s, the British Empire had all but vanished from the map. The once vast tapestry of colonies had given way to a new entity, the Commonwealth of Nations. This voluntary association of independent sovereign states, bound by shared history, language, and values, represented a significant departure from the old imperial model. The transition from empire to Commonwealth was not without its challenges. However, the Commonwealth offered a new framework for engagement, one based on equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. The Commonwealth, with its diverse membership, has played a significant role in promoting dialogue and cooperation on global issues.